Fear comes in two forms: the kind you feel in your body, the tight chest, the frozen breath, the tension that makes the world feel heavier, and the kind that lives in the mind. Subtle, invisible, but far more powerful. Marcus Aurelius understood this centuries ago. He wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And there's no sentence that exposes fear more accurately, because fear is not the event. Fear is the interpretation. It's the story your mind tells before anything has even happened. And the real danger of fear isn't that we feel it, it's that we let it lead us. We behave as if it were truth, not a reaction. As if it were fate, not perception. This chapter is about how the Stoics broke that pattern, how they turned fear into clarity rather than chaos, how Marcus Aurelius trained himself to face what scared him without letting it decide the course of his life. You are on Human OS. Welcome. Let's begin with the foundation. Fear is automatic. It's ancient. It was built into us for survival, not for peace. But just because a reaction is automatic doesn't mean it's accurate. The Stoics warned, don't trust the first impression. Examine it. You don't fear the darkness. You fear what your mind imagines in it. You don't fear the future. You fear the version of the future you've constructed. You don't fear people. You fear their judgment. You don't fear taking action. You fear the possibility of failure. And Marcus Aurelius practiced this separation every single morning. He would write to himself, "Today I will meet ingratitude, criticism, arrogance, selfishness, but I know the nature of these things, and I know the nature of my own mind." He wasn't lying to himself. He wasn't pretending the world would be gentle. He wasn't trying to create comfort. He was preparing his mind, calmly, logically, deliberately, not to eliminate fear, but to shrink it. This is the Stoic truth. Fear loses its power the moment you describe it honestly, when you stop letting it be a shadow and force it to take shape. Here's your first Stoic practice. Separate the impression from the fact. What you feel is one thing. What is actually happening is another. When you learn to distinguish them, fear stops being your commander. It becomes information, not destiny. And in the next part, we'll go deeper. How fear is born, how the mind feeds it, and how Marcus Aurelius trained himself to respond with clarity, not panic. Fear doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's not a mysterious force that simply happens to you. Fear has a structure, a rhythm, a predictable way of entering the mind, spreading, and eventually taking control. And Marcus Aurelius understood this long before modern psychology ever existed. He wrote, "If you are troubled by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." In this single sentence lies the entire Stoic method for dissolving fear. But to make it work, you must understand what actually happens in the mind. Fear always begins with perception. Something happens. A sound, a message, a memory, a thought, an unexpected situation. Before you can think clearly, the mind reacts. It creates an immediate impression, a raw emotional picture of what the stimulus might mean. And this first impression is almost never accurate, yet most people take it as truth. The Stoics warned about this constantly. The first reaction isn't reality, it's just the mind's instinctive response. After perception comes imagination. This is where fear grows teeth. The mind begins to add details that do not exist. It fills blank spaces with worst-case scenarios. It exaggerates the possible outcomes. A delay becomes rejection. A challenge becomes disaster. A mistake becomes something final and unforgivable. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to keep the mind free from unnecessary thoughts for this exact reason. Imagination can turn small concerns into heavy, overwhelming fears. If this imagined version of reality isn't questioned, the next stage begins. Attachment. The mind starts believing its own exaggerated story. You begin to emotionally prepare for something that hasn't even happened. Thoughts become assumptions. Assumptions become expectations. And expectations become stress. Fear becomes a lens through which you interpret everything, not because it is real, but because it feels real. From here, fear naturally transforms into avoidance. Avoidance is the moment fear becomes a rule for how you behave. You start staying away from situations that challenge you. You hold back. You hesitate. You shrink. And the more you avoid something, the more the fear of it grows. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He often reminded himself that difficulty never becomes easier by avoiding it. Avoidance only feeds fear, making the mind more fragile. And then there is the final stage, the one that gives fear its full power. Silence. Fear thrives when it goes unexamined. It becomes stronger when you keep everything inside, when you never challenge your own thoughts, when you allow the mind to replay the same stories without interruption. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations to be published. He wrote them to confront his own fears honestly. He knew that the moment you put a thought into words, it loses part of its strength. Things that stay in the dark feel larger. Things brought into the light become manageable. The truth is simple. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a process. It has stages, momentum, and direction. And once you understand this process, you can interrupt it. You can stop it before it grows. You can reduce it before it takes command. You can see it clearly instead of being controlled by it. Fear doesn't always come as a dramatic moment. Most of the time, it arrives quietly. A thought, a guess, a feeling in the stomach. Something small that begins to shape the way you interpret everything else. And if you don't notice this shift early, fear begins to think for you. It chooses your reactions. It chooses your tone. It chooses what you avoid. It chooses what you convince yourself you're not ready for. Marcus Aurelius understood that fear becomes powerful, not because it is strong, but because the mind is untrained. An untrained mind gives fear authority. A trained mind makes fear irrelevant. This chapter is about the moment-to-moment tools the Stoics used to stay steady while fear tried to rise. The techniques that stopped panic before it formed, restored clarity when emotions began to distort the picture, and brought the mind back under control even in the middle of pressure. These are the techniques Marcus Aurelius practiced daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes from one breath to the next. And here they are, not as a checklist, but as a way of thinking. The first technique, naming the sensation fear tries to stay vague. It spreads by being undefined, a shadow, an impression, a sense of unease. Stoics countered this by doing something simple but powerful, giving the sensation a name. Marcus Aurelius constantly broke fear into pieces. This is tension in my chest. This is anticipation. This is uncertainty, not danger. This is discomfort, not disaster. By doing this, he forced the mind to see the situation clearly. Fear becomes manageable when you describe it in plain language. You can't fight smoke. but you can handle something with shape. When you name your inner state, fear loses its mystery. It becomes a physical sensation, not a prophecy. The second technique, returning to the facts. Fear thrives on assumptions. It grows in the gap between what I know and what I imagine. Stoics narrowed that gap by forcing themselves to return again and again to the raw facts of the moment. What has actually happened? What do I truly know? What is real right now? Marcus Aurelius used this constantly. Noticing worry, he would remind himself, "You are reacting to an impression, not to the event." Facts calm the mind because they provide ground to stand on. Assumptions create panic because they remove that ground. Whenever the Stoics felt fear rising, they stripped away everything imaginary and stayed with what could be proven. This is one of the strongest forms of self-defense against fear. The third technique, shrinking the moment. Fear always pulls you into the future. It drags your mind into possibilities, outcomes, scenarios, timelines. Stoics broke fear's momentum by shrinking their attention to the present action. What can I do right now? What is the next step? Only the next step. What is within my control in this exact moment? Marcus Aurelius wrote again and again that life happens in single actions, one breath at a time, one decision at a time, one choice at a time. Fear magnifies the whole mountain. Stoicism focuses on the next foothold. When you come back to the present moment, fear loses the advantage of distance. It cannot overwhelm you with future possibilities if your mind is anchored to now. The fourth technique, remembering your nature. Stoics fought fear not by pretending to be unafraid, but by remembering who they were. Humans are born with the capacity to reason, to examine, to step back from impulses, to choose how to respond. Whenever fear rose, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the mind is stronger than what it fears. Not because he was an emperor, but because every human mind carries the ability to choose perspective. The Stoics believed that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision that your principles matter more than your feelings. Fear tries to convince you that you are weak. Stoicism reminds you that you are capable. Every moment of fear is an opportunity to return to your nature, the part of you that can stay calm, deliberate, and steady under pressure. The fifth technique, accepting what is not yours. A large part of fear comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. Outcomes, judgments, timing, reactions, chaos, chance. The Stoics saw these as external, not personal. Marcus Aurelius constantly separated the world in front of him into two domains, what belongs to him and what does not. Fear loses its strength when you stop pretending you control the uncontrollable. You don't control the world. You control your actions within it. You don't control the storm. You control the stance you take in the rain. When you release what isn't yours, something powerful happens. Your energy returns. Your clarity returns. Your stability returns. Because fear cannot dominate a mind that refuses to carry weight it never needed to hold. The sixth technique, acting despite emotion. Stoicism is not a philosophy of waiting for fear to disappear. It is a philosophy of acting with integrity even when fear is present. Marcus Aurelius lived through plagues, wars, political instability, and personal tragedy, none of which waited for him to feel brave. So he built a discipline of moving forward even when emotion resisted. Action breaks fear. Motion dissolves hesitation. Doing the right thing strengthens the mind more than waiting for comfort. When fear tells you to pause, the Stoic asks, What action aligns with who I want to be? And then he acts. This is the essence of Stoic courage, choosing behavior based on values, not emotions. The seventh technique, returning to perspective. Fear makes everything seem larger than it is. Stoicism brings everything back to scale. Marcus Aurelius frequently wrote about the brevity of life, the smallness of human worries, the vastness of time, and the insignificance of many of the fears that dominate our days. He wasn't denying the importance of life. He was freeing himself from the tyranny of imagined catastrophes. The Stoic perspective is simple. If it won't matter in the long arc of your life, it shouldn't control your present moment. Perspective shrinks fear. It restores balance. It reminds the mind that what feels overwhelming is often just temporary turbulence. Fear isn't defeated in a single moment. It is interrupted again and again by clear thinking, deliberate action, and the continual return to what is real. These techniques were not theories for Marcus Aurelius. They were survival tools, ways to remain steady while living through chaos. In the next part, we'll go even deeper into the emotional layer. Why the mind clings to fear, why fear feels so convincing, and how Stoicism rebuilds the mind into something resilient, courageous, and unshakably calm. There is a turning point in every person's life when pretending stops working. You can hide your intentions from others. You can hide your weakness behind confidence. You can hide your fear inside jokes, distraction, or ambition. But you cannot hide anything from yourself without paying a price. Marcus Aurelius understood this long before modern psychology existed. He wrote again and again that the soul collapses under falsehood, and that the only path to clarity is ruthless self-honesty. Not dramatic, emotional confession, but the quiet discipline of seeing things as they truly are. The Stoics didn't worship honesty because it made them good people. They practiced honesty because it made them effective people. Because deception, especially self-deception, makes every action slower, weaker, and less stable. If you want to do anything right in this world, you must begin by cleaning your inner lens. Most people don't live, they act. They perform a version of themselves they think others expect, adjusting constantly to reactions, comments, judgment, admiration, or silence. When you perform, everything becomes exhausting. Every choice becomes heavy. Every task becomes blurry. Every failure becomes personal. But when you act from a place of clear honesty, something shifts. You stop chasing approval. You stop apologizing for what you want. You stop negotiating with your own weakness. You stop rewriting your motives depending on who's watching. Honesty is not about morality, it's about power. The Stoics believed that an honest person cannot be manipulated. Not by fear, not by reward, not by reputation, not even by their own emotions. Because when you see yourself clearly and your motives clearly, no external pressure can twist your direction. You stand straight, not because others expect it, but because you have nothing to hide. Think about how much human suffering comes from dishonesty. You say yes when you mean no. You act confident when you're insecure. You avoid a task because it threatens your ego. You blame others for failures that began with your own inaction. You tell yourself you're trying when you know you're delaying. These micro-lies seem harmless, but they create a second life inside your life, a hidden layer of tension, resentment, avoidance, doubt, and confusion. Every lie you tell yourself becomes a weight you must carry. Every avoided truth becomes a shadow you must outrun. Every false motive becomes a crack in your internal foundation. That is why Marcus Aurelius insisted that a person must constantly return to themselves, stripping away illusions until only the essential remains. Honesty is not comfortable. Honesty is not gentle. Honesty is not flattering. But honesty is clarifying. Once you stop lying to yourself, tasks become simpler, decisions become cleaner, relationships become more genuine, discipline becomes less of a fight, fear loses half of its power, and your direction becomes unmistakably your own. To do something right, anything, you must first ask, why am I doing this? Am I acting from strength or from appetite? Is this coming from clarity or from insecurity? What will remain of this decision 5 years from now? What truth am I avoiding right now? These questions cut through the fog. They strip away excuses. They expose motives that were previously dressed as good reasons. The Stoics weren't obsessed with perfection. They were obsessed with alignment. Does your action match your values? Does your effort match your ambition? Does your character match the person you claim to be? Radical honesty gives you something rare, a life that doesn't collapse under examination. When you are radically honest, you become the same person in every room. There is no mask to maintain, no identity to defend, no performance to rehearse. You become grounded, unshakable, and internally consistent. And that consistency becomes strength. The kind of strength that doesn't shout. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. The kind that simply is. If you want to do anything right, begin with this. Strip away the falsehoods. Remove the excuses. Name your motives simply and clearly. Stand in your truth, even if it makes you uncomfortable, because discomfort fades, but self-respect remains, and nothing in Stoicism is more valuable than that. Every person walks through life carrying an invisible load. Some carry expectations placed on them by others. Some carry past mistakes they can't let go of. Some carry fear disguised as ambition. Some carry anger disguised as strength. And most people, without even knowing it, carry far more than they were ever meant to. Marcus Aurelius believed that suffering doesn't come from circumstances alone, but from the weight we add to those circumstances. We worry twice, we fear twice, we replay problems twice, once in reality and once in imagination. And the imagined version is almost always heavier. The Stoic idea is simple but difficult. You must learn to put down what is not yours to carry. Look around your life for a moment. How much of what stresses you actually belongs to you? How much of what pressures you comes from your own mind? How many responsibilities did you accept without questioning whether they were truly yours? How many beliefs do you hold simply because you've carried them for years? So many people walk through the world exhausted, not because their life is unbearable, but because they never stop to examine which burdens are unnecessary. Marcus wrote that the soul becomes lighter the moment it becomes honest. Honest about what matters. Honest about what doesn't. Honest about what it can control. And honest about what it can only endure. This honesty is what frees a person from invisible weight. Most fear is borrowed from the future. Most guilt is borrowed from the past. Most stress is borrowed from people who aren't even thinking about you. You can spend an entire lifetime carrying loads that were never meant for you. Loads that didn't make you better. Loads that never belonged to your path. The Stoic question is not, how do I carry more? The Stoic question is, why am I carrying this at all? Life becomes clearer when you release the burdens you picked up unconsciously. The burden of impressing people who don't shape your destiny. The burden of replaying conversations that ended years ago. The burden of proving your worth to people who never understood it. The burden of becoming the person others imagined for you. The burden of feeling responsible for every emotion in the room. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that we exist for a short time, a very short time, and that what we carry determines not only how long we endure, but how deeply we live. When you carry too much, everything becomes heavy. Every task feels like a battle. Every setback feels like a collapse. Every choice becomes clouded with hesitation. But when you carry only what is essential, your energy sharpens. Your intentions become aligned. Your mind becomes steady. Your steps become lighter, not because the path changes, but because you do. The Stoics believed that most suffering comes from forgetting what is within your control. You cannot control whether people approve of you. You cannot control whether life is fair. You cannot control whether others act wisely or foolishly. You cannot control the outcomes that depend on forces outside your reach. But you can control what you choose to carry. You can choose which responsibilities are part of your purpose. You can choose which fears deserve your attention. You can choose which expectations to honor and which to release. You can choose how much mental space any moment is allowed to occupy. This isn't detachment from life. It's commitment to life, to the part that is yours to shape. Marcus wrote that the mind must remain clear, regular, and disciplined, like a well-tuned instrument. But an instrument weighed down by unnecessary tension cannot produce its true sound. And a person weighed down by unnecessary burdens cannot produce their true self. So ask yourself the question the Stoics asked every morning. What weight am I carrying today that I don't need? And ask the second question, the one that gives courage. Who would I be if I carried only what is truly mine? A person who learns to put down what is unnecessary becomes calmer, clearer, and more powerful. Not because life magically becomes easier, but because their strength is no longer wasted on what never belonged to them. This is the Stoic cure for fear, anxiety, pressure, and overthinking. Not escape, not denial, not avoidance, but the disciplined, daily practice of choosing what to carry and what to let fall to the ground. There are moments in life when staying calm feels impossible. Moments when fear rises like a tide, when the world narrows into a single overwhelming problem, when every thought spirals into 10 more. Most people believe these moments break them, but Marcus Aurelius believed something different. These moments reveal them. The Stoic idea is not that you should feel nothing. It is that emotions are waves, and you are the ocean beneath them. The surface may shake, but the depths remain unchanged. When life becomes chaotic, people usually react in two ways. They either tense up and try to control everything, or they collapse under the weight of what they can't control. Both reactions come from fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being powerless. But the Stoics saw fear as a misunderstanding of reality. Marcus wrote that the mind becomes unstable only when it tries to hold what was never meant to be held: the future, the past, the actions of others, the movements of fate. A person becomes overwhelmed not because the world is too heavy, but because they are gripping too tightly. Calmness begins when you loosen your grip, not by giving up, not by withdrawing, but by understanding the structure of life itself. Every difficulty has two layers: what it is and what your mind adds to it. You may be facing a hard situation, but fear adds a second layer, imagining the worst outcome. Overthinking adds a third layer, replaying every scenario. Pride adds a fourth layer, worrying how you'll be judged. Memory adds a fifth layer, comparing it to past failures. And suddenly, the original problem is buried under emotional weight that shouldn't exist. A mind that refuses to break is not the one that resists the storm. It is the one that refuses to create extra storms inside itself. Marcus Aurelius described this strength as returning to the present moment, not in a poetic way, but as a practical discipline. When you return to the present, fear loses its food. When you return to the present, overthinking loses its leverage. When you return to the present, the problem becomes smaller, clearer, and solvable. The Stoics believed that peace is not the absence of chaos. Peace is the refusal to internalize chaos. There will always be people who misunderstand you, injure you, underestimate you, or judge you unfairly. There will always be outcomes you cannot control. There will always be delays, losses, setbacks, and unexpected turns. But none of these things can break a mind that stands inside itself firmly. So many people fall apart because they've trained themselves to react instantly to every emotion, every thought, every trigger. Their mind becomes a battlefield, unguarded, unstructured, always ready to collapse. The Stoics trained the opposite, the ability to pause. A moment of stillness is not weakness. It is strength in its purest form. The person who pauses gains control over the next moment. The person who pauses becomes an observer rather than a victim of thought. The person who pauses refuses to let fear accelerate into panic. Marcus believed that the human mind is like a fortress, but most people leave the gates wide open. They let fear walk in, let frustration take a seat, let anxiety build a home, let doubt command the guards. Fortress walls are not built in a crisis. They are built beforehand in the small daily decisions. Choosing discipline when you want comfort, choosing clarity when you want distraction, choosing patience when you want escape, choosing presence when your mind wants to run in every direction. A mind that practices these things becomes unbreakable, not because it avoids struggle, but because it no longer fears it. When you stop fearing struggle, your posture changes. You stop rushing. You stop panicking. You stop expecting life to be easier than it is. You stop feeling personally attacked by difficulty. You simply meet reality as it arrives, without adding your own chaos to it. This is the essence of Stoic calmness, not the elimination of emotion, but the elimination of unnecessary emotion. The world becomes less frightening when you stop believing every thought your mind generates. The world becomes less threatening when you stop assuming every feeling requires a reaction. The world becomes less chaotic when you stop carrying the chaos inside you. And then something surprising happens. Strength appears quietly. It doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look heroic. It looks like steadiness, the kind that doesn't collapse when life pushes. A mind that refuses to break is not rigid. It is flexible. It adapts. It absorbs. It learns. It recalibrates. It does not beg for comfort. It does not demand certainty. It does not collapse under confusion. It stands. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but steadily. And that steadiness, simple, silent, consistent, is what makes a human being powerful in a way the world cannot shake. In the end, Everything comes down to one simple truth. Your mind is the only territory you truly command. The world will shake, people will disappoint you, plans will collapse. But your response to all of it is yours alone. Marcus Aurelius believed that strength isn't loud. It's built quietly, in the way you think, the way you choose, the way you act when no one is watching. So hold your inner line. Don't trade your peace for chaos. Don't let the world dictate your pace. Move with intention, speak with clarity, and remember that discipline is freedom in disguise.